iHeartMedia presents CEOs You Should Know.
And welcome back. Dick Fain with you. Now our spotlight on Seattle business. And we are excited and honored to be joined by our state's representative in Congress from the 9th District and new assumed chair of the House Armed Services Committee. Welcome, Congressman Adam Smith. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for having me.
We're fantastic, and it's great to have a chance to talk with you. We have a few different agenda items to go through. Love to get your thoughts on some things. And we mentioned the chair of the House Armed Services Committee. So let's start there. Let's start with defense and national security, since that's something that you're very, very in tune with right now, and obviously very important to Washington State voters as well. But the priorities in national defense may be more aligned with voters in your old 9th Congressional District versus the new 9th Congressional District, which includes large swaths of Seattle. Do they have a different approach to military matters, and how do you kind of navigate those waters when you have when your congressional district shifts?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit different, obviously. The old district had Joint Base Lewis McChord and a large population of both active duty military and retirees and veterans. So a little bit more military, a little bit more conservative. The new district definitely more liberal, concerned about the size of the defense budget. But I think the thing that connects both districts and most of the country is they want to see the money well spent. And I think that's the biggest concern, is the waste within the Pentagon, inefficiencies that have been there. We've been battling for years just to get an audit of the Pentagon. They actually can't fully audit. They don't know where they spend all of their money. So we're pushing on that. And I think this big thing that brings us together is spend the money wisely and well. And then also I think there's a very strong opinion that we have overly relied on the military in our foreign policy. There are other tools in the toolbox, diplomacy, allies, better ways to go. But all the money winds up at the Pentagon, and the State Department is battling for scraps. So we're trying to adjust that. And also we want to modernize the military. Our military was built primarily after World War II to be ready to fight two major wars. Well, that's just not going to happen. Most of our threats now are far less direct than that. You have, terrorism you worry about, cybersecurity, information campaigns like the efforts to disrupt our election. How do we start spending money on the things and in the areas that are going to enable us to defend against that, move off of some of the legacy systems and embrace ideas like artificial intelligence, quantum computing? How does that factor in to the weapons of the future and the way we're going to fight wars? So that's the big picture of what we're trying to do.
You mentioned the election tampering there, and certainly Russia is ambitious in world matters right now. And are these documented attacks on our elections a result of direct state action, or are these more rogue entities that aren't really connected to the Kremlin, and how should we address these threats?
My personal belief, and from what I've seen from the intel, is it is direct state action. There is a major battle going on globally right now, and it's being driven primarily by Putin, but also by China and President Xi. They are trying to promote autocracy, and also economically, I refer to it as kleptocracy. Instead of economic and political freedom, they want dictatorial control. They don't want people to think that democracy works, because if democracy works, they fear they will be threatened in their home country. So Putin and Xi are all over the place trying to undermine democracy, and that was really what they did here. Certainly the evidence shows that they preferred President Trump over Secretary Clinton, but more than anything, they wanted people to believe that democracy doesn't work. They turned people against each other. They planted people in different extremist groups, both right and left, to try to turn up the heat and make people think the system doesn't work. They've done it in Europe, and they've also backed strong autocratic leaders in places like Syria. I mean, Assad is primarily in power, well, largely because of Iran, but also because Russia came to his defense. Now in Libya, they're trying to prop up a strongman government there as well. They don't want freedom to work, both economically and politically. So that's where it's coming from.
On our home front, the threats that Homeland Security has to deal with, again, we've got these mass shootings that are seemingly in our newspapers, on our phones on a weekly basis now. And, we see that Walmart today has decided to abolish sales of handgun and short barrel rifle ammunition and request that customers refrain from openly carrying weapons. How do you propose the gun issue is balanced, knowing that there are states out there like ours that can't quite figure out why people would be carrying guns on their pants. And then there are a lot of states out there where that's just common practice.
Yeah, no, it is very difficult because there are different beliefs out there, but I think we have to sort of get away from the old political arguments and look at the substance of what is happening here. This is something that's beginning to touch absolutely everybody. It's amazing the number of people you talk to. Like for years, I mean, Gabby Giffords was my best friend in Congress when that happened down in Tucson. About, sometime last year, my son, was in a, what do they call it? Stay in place. I'm getting the word wrong, but they thought they had an active lockdown. Shelter in place. That's the phrase. Well, you stay in the room, and he's talking to me. He's terrified. There was something going on in the gym. Some kid they thought brought a gun. It was only a knife. But this touches everybody now, and there's no easy solution. We're not going to pass a piece of legislation that's going to stop this from happening, but there are some common sense things we can do to reduce it. And I think part of it is making guns less available. There is no reason for average people out there to have weapons of war like these semi-automatic assault rifles. No reason whatsoever. Not for self-defense, not for hunting. Also, I think we need to do a better job of flagging people who are risks in the community and taking away their right to own those firearms. And yes, we need to do background checks. We passed in this state just a couple years ago now a universal background check. But the interesting thing about that, and when you talk about our state being different from others, I think it was probably 17 years ago now, that exact same initiative was on the ballot in this state. Well, not exact same, but pretty much to close the gun show loophole to get better background checks. It failed 2-1. In the state of Washington, I think it was 2002. It was somewhere in that time frame. 15 years later, the politics shifted as people started to understand the danger and to change what they argued for in policy. People who were concerned about gun violence organized. They got people together. They lobbied elected officials. They elected officials who agreed with them, and the policy changed. So I think we can change this across the country as well to better protect ourselves. But that's not the only part of the issue, certainly.
What's the argument on the other side, the NRA's argument that people should be allowed to have assault rifles, weapons of war, as you mentioned?
There are two arguments. Number one is they believe that the more guns out there, the safer we are. I think that's insane, but in fact, Texas, literally the day before or the day of the shooting that just happened in Midland and Odessa, passed a law to expand where people could have guns. Because in their mind, having a gun means that you can protect yourself against somebody. But the thing is, the more likelihood is if that gun is out there, it's more likely to harm somebody. And in many instances, people have had guns, but they don't have time. When somebody surprises you, I'm sorry to tell a story here, but there was a member of Congress, a Republican, who was talking about how important this was, that you had to have a gun all the time. And he's in the middle of a town hall meeting, and he pulls out a gun. He's got on it, and puts it down on the table and says, and he literally said this, "I'm not going to be Gabby Giffords." Okay?
Wow.
And I was like, listen, you jackass. Sorry. If someone pulled a gun out right now, they'd shoot you dead before you had a chance to even pull that damn thing out.
Right.
But that's the mentality. It's this Wild West idea that if I have a gun, I'm going to be... And there is story after story after story that the presence of the gun in your household, in your car... We had a week here about 4 years ago. 3 kids under the age of 3 were all killed by a gun that they found in the house. One of them was a police officer's gun. Okay, so the presence of a gun is more dangerous, particularly if you aren't trained in how to handle it. That's one argument. Second argument is that we have to have guns to protect ourselves from a tyrannical government. Basically, it's like Red Dawn.
Right.
I think you're a little younger than I am, but
I vaguely remember that.
Yes, right. The idea that they're going to come and get us, and the only thing that's going to protect us is having our guns. But there's a couple things about that. First of all, there are a lot. Afghanistan. No country I've ever been to has as many guns as Afghanistan, and they have been systematically taken over by tyrannical governments for 600 years, all right? It's not a protection. And as the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, I can tell you that if the 82nd Airborne is coming over the hill, whatever you've got in your basement you're done.
It's not going to work.
Okay, you're not going to win. What protects us from a tyrannical government is our Constitution, is our nation of laws, is our institution, our systems of checks and balances, not possessing a whole bunch of firearms to win a fight if it comes to that. We have civilian control of the military so that the military won't do what is done in so many different countries and commit a coup. But I don't think those arguments hold water. And I think if we did this, we would protect more people. It's not the only thing. We've got a culture of anger and violence in this country that we need to get at in a very root cause way. But reducing the access to these weapons would certainly help.
Representative Adam Smith joining us here, and we switched to election politics, and the national politics today seems to be a competition for who can make the most noise to rally their fan base. And voters in the middle have felt a little left out, and you've been one of those few that have held on to your pragmatic position in the face of this pressure to go one side or the other. Have you noticed a difference in how Congress functions because of this, and have you seen a shift in your colleagues' priorities or rhetoric because of this?
Well, I'll start with the bad news and end with some good news. It's gotten worse, yes. It's become more partisan and more divisive. And to me, I was talking, of course, you were a kid when I first was elected to the state senate in your district, but I doorbelled your house way back in 1990. I grew up in SeaTac. I think you grew up in Normandy Park. And we, when I got into politics, it was because I wanted to bring people together to solve problems. That's what I thought politics was. You bring a group of people together who have diverse viewpoints. You listen to them. Yeah, they're different, but then you figure out where the common ground is and you try to solve the problem. That's what politics is supposed to be about to me. What it has become is a partisan, interest group driven food fight where it's my team versus your team. And whatever my team says is right. Mm-hmm. And by the way, if my team says something different 10 seconds later, well, then that's right. Okay. There's no consistent principle. I read an article from some conservative person talking about how you couldn't trust Joe Biden because he lies. I was like, that's interesting. It just, you flip it around and it becomes all about the politics and the partisanship. And what I really want people to understand is it's also about money. All right, you're on talk radio, and how do you get people interested? And it's harder to get people interested when you say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take a diverse group of people. I'm going to bring them together, and I'm going to try to make this problem a little bit less bad. I'm going to improve things. People don't get excited about that. But when you get on the radio and say, that group of people over there, they're screwing you, and I'm going to protect you. They're out to get you, and here's all the crazy stuff they're doing. That gets people motivated. That gets people to listen to the radio, to click on your stuff online, to give to organizations. So we've drifted towards extremism as an organizing principle. We need to drift back to, look, politics is difficult. It's hard to get along. I always tell people, people say, how can I do this job? They hate politics. Well, politics is part of life. And I'll tell you, the worst politics I've ever encountered is in a homeowners association. Forget about Congress, all right? Just getting along with your neighbors. It's hard. You have to communicate in a way that makes you want to get along instead of want to fight. We've got to work on that, but politics has gone in that direction. I will say the class that we elected in Congress in 2018 that I'm now working with, this freshman class that gave Democrats back to the majority, that's what they got elected on. By and large, they did not get elected on an extreme position. They got elected on by saying, I care about my community. I want to improve it. Here's my background. Here's what I've done. Here's why I think I'd be good at the job. And it's a terrific group of people right now in Congress that are really working to solve problems on guns, on health care, on the issues that people care about.
How about one or two Republicans that over the last 30 years you have worked very well with, and why did it work?
Well, I worked very well with Dave Reichert, who was a congressman for a long time. And actually, I worked with him when he was the King County Sheriff, and I was the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Look, it works if you get together and you say, okay, what can we work on? Where are the issues that we agree? I work with Dave. I work with Buck McKeon and Mac Thornberry were the two chairmen of the Armed Services Committee before me when I was the ranking member. I've worked well with them. I've worked well with countless members of the Armed Services Committee. But it's how you approach it. And it's funny, I have two teenagers at home, and I talk to them about how they can get along better with each other and other people. And the way I put it is I said that there's a way you communicate with people when you care about the relationship and you want to try to solidify it and build on it. And then there's a way you communicate when all you're trying to do is win the argument.
Right.
If that's all you're trying to do and you don't want to think about where the other person is coming from, you're not going to get very far. But the key to working with other people is, okay, where are they coming from? Okay, it's important that we work together to get things done, that we keep the government open, that we fund appropriations bill, the basic stuff, provide a decent health care plan. So if you look at someone and say, well, I disagree with you on these issues, but you know what, I agree with you on these. So let's work on these. Let's find the things that we agree on so we can work together and make our community a better place to live. It's not easy, but it is the better approach to constant fighting.
Have you picked a horse in the presidential election yet?
Yeah, there's a long story behind that. No is the short answer. There's a lot of them. I'm thinking about potentially maybe getting involved. And what I'm looking for is a candidate who follows what I just said, who doesn't take the divisive issue, who when they come up hear an argument that they don't agree with, don't say, well, you're just sounding like a Republican, and dismiss them. Address the argument, okay? Why is what they said wrong, whether it's on health care, on education? Argue about the policy. Don't attack the person. I'm looking for someone who's optimistic, who understands the strengths of this country and how to use those strengths to build towards greater solutions. Because, well, I frequently say this, the worst thing about Donald Trump is, and then there's plenty of ideas that pop into my head, so I don't want to claim that this one is, but I think is his divisive approach to politics. We've never had a president in the history of this country who is so focused on belittling opponents and dividing people. He lives off of division and anger. And I think that is driving our politics to a bad place. I want a candidate who's going to take that in a different direction.
And it seems to be mutually opposed with each other. You have a president whose approval rating is so low, and he is divisive, and yet the general take from maybe even both sides is, man, I don't know if there's anybody out there that's going to beat him. How does that play out? Because that just seems contrary.
I disagree strongly with that general take. And you know me that well, but I'm not known for my overwhelming optimism. I see the world as it is. I'm not one of these people who always thinks that I'm going to win or that everything's going to be fine. But even within that context, the 2018 election was as big a repudiation of a president as I've ever seen. Democrats won across the board, across the country, and it was about Trump. The organizations that started after the 2016 election, the Indivisible Group, the Million Moms March, people all across this country organized and said, I don't agree with this politics. Well, Kim Schreier, in her own state, hadn't been that involved in politics, but she looked at it and said, this is terrible. This is not what I want for our community. So she, as a pediatrician, she decided to run. And now she's a member of Congress. That organization is there. Trump's approval ratings are as bad now as they were in November of 2018. I think Democrats are poised to be successful because people have rejected that type of politics. The question is, do we reject that type of politics? Or do we think that our ideas are just better than theirs and we don't see that what people really don't like about Trump is the way he approaches issues? But no, I think it's highly unlikely that Trump's going to get reelected at this point because I think the country has decided that they don't like where he's taking us. But what do we do? We've been in charge before, and we haven't necessarily done very well. So I'm hoping that our politics rises above this moment and doesn't just become the flip side of it.
Congressman Adam Smith joining us here. You mentioned Kim Schreier, a working, a successful doctor deciding to go and work in Washington. And let's talk a little bit about gender equality in this era. And I would say greater focus in gender equality. Why do women still make less than men, and how have you fought to change that?
I think people underestimate the embedded sexism and racism in our country and just how bad it was and for how long. And it's going to take time to change that. Certainly racism, slavery, there's an understanding of that, and it's still a problem. But sexism is terrible. In fact, personal story is I was adopted. My biological mother actually worked for the State Department, and part of the reason I was given up for adoption is in 1965 when I was born, she could not keep me and keep her job. In fact, at the State Department, a married woman could not work there until 1973.
Wow.
If you got married, the presumption was, well, now you have a man to take care of you. You don't need a job. And furthermore, if you have this job, you're taking it away from a man who has a family to support. Now, of course, they didn't have any problem with single men working there. And this was pervasive across our society. And that level of sort of deep-seated sexism in the way people approach things is not eliminated overnight. We've made progress. There's no question about it. Our state, our 2 senators are women. We had Christine Gregoire as our governor for 2 terms. Half of our congressional delegation now is women. We're making progress, but that sexism that was such a part of our society for so long doesn't just go away. You have to work at it.
Why is it that we have to have both man and woman working now to support a family when we didn't 50 years ago?
Look, and that is I think, definitive issue aside from, I put the issues in 2 categories. One is what we've been talking about, which was how does our politics work? Do we figure out a way to work together and solve problems, take advantage of the opportunities we have in this country to actually move forward and create a better society? That's one. But 2 is the concentration of wealth. The fact that the way, part of it is tax law, part of it is simply the simple power of capitalism. Wealth has become so incredibly concentrated that you have a few people at the top making an enormous amount of money, and blue-collar workers. I mean, my father was a baggage handler at United Airlines, and that was enough of a salary to raise our family. 3 kids. Now, that same job has nowhere near kept up with inflation, and a number of reasons for it, but corporations have changed the way they approach things. In fact, it was interesting. Just a couple of weeks ago, a whole bunch of CEOs came out and said that shareholder profit should no longer drive our decisions. And they're right, because that's what's changed. Companies value their executives and they value their shareholders. They don't value their workers. They will come up with every scheme they can to pump up their stock price, and part of those schemes is cutting pay, cutting benefits for workers. Yes, I understand that global competition is much more of a factor now than it was 40, 50 years ago. That doesn't explain why CEO and executive pay and the pay of board members has gone through the ceiling while it's flattened out or gone down for middle-class workers. That concentration of wealth, not paying people for the work they do, is making it very difficult. And what makes it even worse, in our community experiences this, the people at the top end, they've got the money. So housing prices, everything goes up. They can pay.
Right.
All right. And it squeezes everybody out who isn't even beginning to keep up with them. So not only does all the money go to the top, but then they can afford to pay for all this stuff. So that's where the prices go. And middle class and lower class can't afford it. Mm-hmm. And education and housing are the 2 biggest issues. They're not the only 2. But
let's talk about education. What is the most practical and cost-effective way to kind of break this cycle of undereducation and underemployment for our citizens that are at the poverty line, below the poverty line, to give them an opportunity at the age of 8, 10, 12, 15, not to start the race so far behind the rich?
Yeah, well, giving support to our K-12 education system is really where it starts. I graduated from high school, and certainly the Highline School District, which I assume you went to as well,
yes,
is not the best school district in the state, but they gave me a good education. I walked out my door to my elementary school, middle school, and high school. My parents didn't have to pay for it. I had access to a good education. Supporting K-12, and I'm really worried about all this emphasis on charter schools and vouchers and basically siphoning money away from the public school system. The public school system works if parents participate and it's adequately funded. We need to support it and give people that opportunity from the start. And then I really think we need to make access to a 2-year degree and access to any sort of apprenticeship, job training, preferably free, but as affordable as possible. We also have a little bit of a problem that the emphasis has been you got to go to college and get a 4-year degree in whatever. That's not really that cost effective anymore. In some cases, yes, but we have to make sure that post-high school education is applicable, that it's moving you towards a career, a job, an opportunity. It doesn't have to be one specific thing, but to make sure that that's where the money is being spent. I think we need to spend more money on that to give people the job training they need, because competition's a reality. I mentioned my father. In the 32 years he had that job, it really didn't change that much. He wasn't coming home going, I got to update my skills. Right. Well, that's not the case. Today, almost no matter what you do, you've got to be able to update your skills. So we've got to make that available. Give incentives to companies to pay for their workers' education or further job training. Update the skills on a regular basis and have the systems in our society that do that. And we have some very good ones. I work for the unions. They do apprenticeships very well. Our community and technical colleges in this state do a great job, but they're oversubscribed. They don't have enough room for all the people people who need what they're providing.
Final few minutes with Representative Adam Smith. How do you best handle thousands of people knocking on our southern border in a humane way, yet maintaining a process where there's an involved procedure to make them Americans?
Well, to begin with, the hostility of this administration to immigration is an enormous problem. Immigration has been a huge plus in this country from the very start. People from all over the world want to come here to build a better life for them and their families, and that has renewed us from the beginning. So this hostility against refugees, against asylum, against every type of immigrant. In fact, I was with my PT before I came here, and he's got a client who husband's a citizen. The wife is from Canada, and they have a child together. She just got deported. And it's just they won't process the paperwork. Mm-hmm. She's qualified. So we need to end that hostility. And also, the people coming at the southern border, by and large right now, are coming because their economic circumstances and their safety at home is terrible. And that's Central America primarily. So we need to help work on that. And we had some success working with Mexico. We don't actually have, as many Mexicans coming at the border seeking asylum as we used to. Central America is important to try and reduce that. And also the president saying he's going to close the border is part of the reason this is my last shot. I got to come. And then we need to spend the money to process the asylum seekers, because the crisis right now, and the president conflates this, is not people trying to sneak into the country. It's people showing up and saying, I want asylum. So building a wall, they're not trying to sneak in. They're just trying to say, I'm here. I want my day in court to seek asylum. We need to spend more money on making sure that they have access to that. Also, I don't think detaining them is necessary in most cases. Put them with a host family, put a situation where they'll show up. And by the way, the president says like 2% of people show up for their 83% is the actual figure of who will show up. So I think we need to take steps to make sure that we have a legal immigration system that works and that we are helping in the broader Latin American region to reduce the violence and insecurity that leads so many people to come.
And with Seattle and Bellevue, significant parts of your district, the population skyrocketing, especially people of color, immigrant communities as well. How do these changing demographics and urbanization change your approach to governing, and how have you embraced this new diversity that we have here?
Well, they don't really change my approach to governing, because my approach to governing is who's your constituency? You mentioned my district changed. My constituency changed with that. I had 55% new people in my district in 2012. And frankly, I love that, because they're 55% of people I got to go get to know. Mm-hmm. Who are they? What do they care about? What are their issues? And it's no different no matter who they are. Well, it's different in the sense that they all have slightly different interests, but you reach out and you include them. And I think that's the great challenge, not to keep coming back to South King County. But when you and I were there, it was like 95% white. It is now incredibly diverse. Well, the way to make that community work is to reach out to those new communities and include them in school districts, in business, in politics. And for a long time, South King County didn't do a particularly good job of that. You had the old guard still running things, and a lot of the new people who had immigrated from other countries didn't feel comfortable. That's really changing. When you look at the elected officials in Tukwila, in Burien, in SeaTac, in Kent, and Renton, they are beginning to reflect the diversity
Absolutely.
of the community, as is the leadership. And when you have that type of inclusion, it's how you do anything. Who are your constituents, and make sure they have a voice. And at the end of the day, that's my job. I represent 700,000 people. We don't have a democracy in this country. We have a republic. So what that means is you don't get a vote on everything. You get to vote for someone who does get to be your voice. Well, that only works if I'm listening to those people, if I understand what they care about, if my staff and I aggressively go out in the community, not just wait for someone to call, but say, what do you care about? How can we help you? How can I make sure that you feel that your voice is being heard in the United States Congress? Because if they feel that, they believe in this country. And that is another huge problem we have. People don't believe that they're being heard. It's not so much that they don't get their way, it's that they don't feel like they had a fair shot. Mm-hmm. It's like being at a football game and feeling like the referee screwed you. You feel like you didn't have a fair chance. And that's what's really important in my job. Make sure that people feel like, okay, even if I didn't get what I wanted, I got listened to, I had access, and I know that my voice matters, because that's the way a representative democracy is supposed to work. And why, by the way, it's better than the model that Putin and Xi and others are putting out there. You don't have any voice in those systems. Here, we want to make sure that that voice is heard.
You mentioned football there. We'll wrap it up in a minute with a football question for you. But before we get there, our final question on political matters, something that is near and dear to our governor's heart, and that's climate change. And how in line with Governor Inslee's climate initiative are you, and where do you differ?
I'm completely in line with it. And the frustrating part for me is we have the technology. We can do this. Yes, for roughly 175 years, fossil fuels have driven our economy. And I know the damage that it's done to the planet. It also built an incredibly strong economy. But we can generate alternatives. And in my district in particular, there are so many new companies in the energy field who are coming up with better battery technology so that the power can be stored longer, coming up with alternative sources of fuel. We lead the nation in wind power. We actually do more in solar power than most people realize. If we make the investments, stop subsidizing fossil fuels, make the investment in more efficient. Everywhere you use energy, you can use it more efficiently. Make those investments. I think we can, reduce our dependency on fossil fuels, and it's crucial that we do because we're frying the planet. And we want to keep living here for a long time. So I think we can make those investments and make those changes. And I think Jay was a great leader on that, is a great leader on that.
All right. I'm a sports talk show host. You're a sports fan.
Yes.
You're a football fan. And John Schneider, Pete Carroll should be thrown behind bars for the burglary that they just should be convicted against the Houston Texans. Your thoughts as we start going into the football season here in just a few days about the Seahawks' chances?
I'm incredibly excited. I'm a Husky as well, so we got to mention that.
Let's do it.
It's
Talk
great.
about them both.
UW and Seattle, their football programs are just terrific. They got great leadership, and we've been here long enough to know there were times when that was not the case. It's just so great to just trust the people who are running the show and to have positive things to talk about. Now, I think John Schneider and Pete Carroll in particular, I mean, his approach just to always compete, be positive, move forward. I think it's really, really helped the program. And also shout out to Paul Allen, for buying the franchise when we were, in a real bad shape there and building what is an incredibly great team. And the University of Washington's been a part of my life forever. I went to law school there. My wife graduated there. I've got a daughter who's a sophomore there now. It's a terrific institution in so many ways. But, Chris Peterson's doing a fantastic job. So I love the fall, and now more than ever, and also it means that baseball season will be ending soon, so we can.
And we won't talk about that.
Stop worrying about that. But no, it's an exciting year, and I'm really, really happy to live here.
That's our spotlight on Seattle business with Representative Adam Smith. Thank you so much. Appreciate you joining us.
Well, thanks. I appreciate the chance.
This has been iHeartMedia's CEOs You Should Know.